My eyes were bleeding. I woke up this morning, and the first thing I saw was red. Not on a screen, not in a headline, but in the mirror. Thin, red veins crawling across the white of my eyes, a faint line of dried blood near the corner. I blinked twice, rubbed my face, and told myself it was nothing. Maybe irritation, maybe lack of sleep. But I knew. My body was trying to tell me something it had been trying to say for years. Stop. If you've ever pushed yourself so far that your body began to rebel, comment, I understand. Because that's what this is. Not a story about pain, but about a warning. A message written in blood, from me to myself. Last night was long, like most nights have been for the past 20 years. I was at the factory, checking progress on a batch of battery prototypes. It was almost 3 a.m., the team half asleep, but still running diagnostics. I looked around screens flickering blue, the hum of machines, the metallic smell of aluminum and sweat, and I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. My head was pounding, my eyes were burning, but I told myself I'd rest after one more test, one more decision, one more email. That's the problem with people like me. We always think the next one more will fix everything, but it never does. By the time I got home, it was nearly sunrise. The sky was pale, quiet, indifferent. I remember unlocking the door, stepping inside, and thinking how strange it was that silence can feel heavier than noise. My phone was still vibrating messages, notifications, investors, journalists, engineers. I turned it face down on the table, trying to ignore it. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and that's when I saw it. The first trace of red, just below my eye. I thought I'd scratched myself, but then the blood spread slowly across the white, like a warning light flickering on a dashboard. It didn't hurt. It just looked wrong, too human. People think I'm made of steel, that I can function on 4 hours of sleep forever, that burnout doesn't exist if your purpose is big enough. They think exhaustion is a sign of dedication. That's the myth we've all bought into, the idea that pain equals progress, that rest is weakness, that to slow down is to fail. But last night, my body disagreed. I sat on the bathroom floor for a few minutes, back against the wall, trying to breathe through the dizziness. The floor was cold, the tiles blurred, and for a brief second, I thought of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Not fear of losing a company, not fear of failure, but fear of myself, of what I was becoming. I've built machines that don't sleep, algorithms that don't tire, rockets that can land themselves. But I forgot that I'm not one of them. You know, people often say to me, Elon, you're relentless. They mean it as a compliment. I used to take it that way. But lately I wonder, what if relentlessness is just another word for self-neglect? What if the drive that builds empires is the same drive that quietly destroys the person behind them? The bleeding stopped after a while. I cleaned it up, stared at my reflection, and almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd, how something so small could shake me more than any rocket explosion ever did. In the mirror, I didn't see the billionaire, or the engineer, or the headline. I just saw a man who forgot to blink. When did we start believing that fatigue is noble, that the darker the circles under your eyes, the brighter your future will be? When did overworking become a form of virtue signaling, a badge of honor we wear until it kills us? I've met young engineers who brag about sleeping at their desks, about skipping meals to finish code. They think it's loyalty. I used to think so too, but now I see it differently. It's not loyalty, it's self-erasure disguised as dedication. The truth is, I've been addicted to productivity for as long as I can remember. It's not just work, it's an anesthetic. The busier I am, the less I have to feel. The less I have to think about the things I've lost along the way. Relationships, quiet moments, the ability to just sit and exist without measuring the value of every minute. Sometimes I wonder if I built so many machines because I was afraid to face how fragile I am. I remember one night years ago, during the early days of SpaceX, when we almost went bankrupt. I didn't sleep for 3 days straight. My eyes twitched uncontrollably. I couldn't focus on the screen anymore. Everything doubled. Back then, I thought the solution was simple. Work harder. But it wasn't. It was rest. It was humility. It was admitting that even visionaries are made of flesh and nerve endings. This morning, when I looked at that blood in my eye, I finally understood something I've been refusing to see. The human body is not a machine you can debug endlessly. It's a contract, and it always comes with fine print. You ignore it long enough, it collects the debt. I used to mock the idea of balance. I called it an excuse for mediocrity. You can't change the world if you're comfortable, I'd say, and I still believe greatness requires discomfort. But there's a difference between pain that builds and pain that breaks. Last night, I crossed that line. The irony? I was working on a presentation about human longevity. My assistant sent me an email at 2 a.m. asking for a final quote about the future of health. I typed something like, "Humans will soon live longer, healthier lives through technology." I pressed send, stared at the words, and realized I didn't believe them anymore. Not because the science isn't real, but because I'm proof that progress means nothing if the person making it is deteriorating. I used to think the body was just a vessel for the mind, replaceable, secondary. But lately, I think the body is the mind's last defense. When you won't listen to your thoughts, it speaks through pain. When you ignore the signals, it bleeds. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe my body got tired of asking nicely. I drove to the office anyway this morning. Habit. I told myself I'd just check on a few things, then rest later. I never learn. The drive was quiet, the city still half asleep. Sunlight cut through the windshield, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if the red in my eyes was reflection or reality. I parked outside the building, but I didn't get out. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, feeling empty. It's strange how emptiness can feel heavier than exhaustion. You can push your body beyond limits, but emptiness doesn't move. It sits there, quietly asking, "What are you doing all this for?" And I didn't have an answer. I thought about all the interviews where I said things like, "I'll rest when I'm dead." It used to sound heroic. Now, it just sounds tragic. People look at me and see discipline. What they don't see are the nights when my vision blurs, when I forget the taste of food, when my hands shake from caffeine and adrenaline, when I look at the clock and realize it's been 20 hours since I last spoke to another human being about something that wasn't work. That's the part no one glamorizes, the silence after the applause, the cost of being driven. I'm not saying dedication is wrong. I'm saying obsession has a price, and sometimes it's paid in blood. If you're watching this and you've ever woken up tired before the day even began, if you've ever stared at a screen until your vision blurred, if you've ever told yourself, just one more hour, when your body begged you to stop, then you know what I'm talking about. The world doesn't reward balance, it rewards extremes. It celebrates the sleepless, the relentless, the unbreakable. But there's a hidden truth behind every unbreakable person. They've already cracked, they just learned how to hide the sound. When I saw my eyes bleeding, I realized I'd been hiding the sound for years. I don't even remember the last time I woke up without an alarm, or went to bed without thinking about metrics, deadlines, expectations. I live in a world built on acceleration, but lately, I've started craving stillness. Not because I'm tired of progress, but because I'm tired of paying for it with my health. The human mind is extraordinary. It can build rockets, decode genomes, imagine entire civilizations on Mars. But the body, it's ancient. It hasn't evolved to match our ambition. It still needs sleep, sunlight, kindness. It still bleeds when you forget that. And I forgot. Maybe this is what it takes for people like me to learn. Not burnout, but breakdown. Not a whisper, but blood. Because blood gets your attention. I used to think that fear was something to overcome. Now I think fear is sometimes a friend, a warning that something sacred is being ignored. My body isn't betraying me, it's protecting me from myself. I took a deep breath and finally decided to call it what it was. Exhaustion. Not weakness. Not failure. just the natural consequence of forgetting I'm human. And that's when something unexpected happened. I felt relief, because naming it means I can finally change it. People think awareness comes from research, from data, from algorithms. But sometimes awareness comes from silence, from sitting alone in a car at dawn, realizing that if you don't change something soon, you might not make it to the future you're trying to build. The bleeding stopped, but the message didn't. I sat there for a while longer, watching the sun rise through the windshield, thinking about how light travels millions of miles just to reach us, and how easily we forget to look up. Last night, my body spoke louder than any success ever has, and for once, I listened. I drove home later that morning instead of walking into the building. That decision alone felt rebellious, almost foreign. For years, I've trained myself to ignore fatigue, to keep pushing, to see rest as an obstacle. But in that moment, I realized something I never had before. Nobody is forcing me to live this way except me. The world may expect a lot, but it doesn't actually hold the whip I do. I'm the one who keeps tightening it. It's strange how success can become a trap disguised as freedom. People imagine that once you make it, life gets easier. The truth is, it just gets louder. Every success amplifies the noise, the expectations, the requests, the opinions, the endless pressure to keep outperforming yourself. And the moment you pause, people ask, "What's wrong?" Nothing's wrong. I'm just human. When I walked into my house again, I looked around at the furniture, the art, the technology, the quiet evidence of a life built on motion. Everything there existed because I kept moving, but none of it knew how to make me stop. I went to the living room and sat on the floor, the same floor where my kids once played with toy rockets. I remembered their laughter, how it used to echo through the hallways, how it used to remind me that joy didn't need to be earned. I don't hear that sound as often now. Somewhere along the line, I convinced myself that building the future for them mattered more than being present with them. That progress justified absence. But progress isn't a person. It doesn't hug you back. I checked my phone again, hundreds of messages. Some from my team, some from people I've never met. A few from friends I hadn't replied to in weeks. The irony wasn't lost on me. I can launch satellites into orbit, but I can't send a text that says, "I'm sorry I've been distant." That's the thing about overworking. It doesn't just drain your energy, it narrows your world. You start optimizing everything, even relationships. You measure moments in productivity, affection and efficiency. You start asking, what's the ROI of being human? And when your eyes start bleeding, that's your body's way of saying, you've gone too far into the algorithm. You know what the weirdest part is? Most people won't believe this story. They'll think it's exaggerated, dramatized, because they can't imagine someone like me being fragile. But fragility isn't weakness, it's feedback. My doctor said it was subconjunctival hemorrhage, tiny blood vessels in the eye that burst under pressure, lack of sleep, dehydration. Simple biology. But biology doesn't lie. It only mirrors the truth you refuse to face. He told me, "It's harmless." I nodded, but it didn't feel harmless. It felt like a mirror breaking from the inside. Because what's harmless to the body can still be catastrophic to the mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of work this time, but because of silence. My body was finally resting, but my thoughts weren't. They kept spinning around a single realization. I've spent my whole life teaching machines how to think faster, while teaching myself how to feel less. I wondered how many people live this way. How many of us confuse motion for meaning, progress for peace. We live in a culture that glorifies the grind. Rise and grind. Sleep when you're dead. It sounds heroic until you actually start dying inside. We've made exhaustion fashionable. Burnout has become a badge of honor. People post pictures of their tired eyes like medals, as if suffering validates purpose. But it doesn't, it only numbs it. When did we start believing that constant productivity equals value? When did we decide that a full schedule means a full life? Somewhere, someone taught us that to rest is to fall behind, But behind who? There's no finish line. There's just the illusion of one. And most of us are sprinting toward it, eyes bleeding, hearts racing, forgetting that the finish line is also the edge. I think about the early engineers at Tesla, how we used to sleep on the factory floor, how proud we were of that. We thought we were making history, and maybe we were, but we were also making a mistake. Because history doesn't remember who slept, it remembers who lasted. No one ever told me that sustainability applies to the soul too. I used to talk about sustainability in terms of energy, climate, technology. But what about personal sustainability, emotional sustainability, the ability to wake up and still want to be alive in your own creation? The bleeding in my eyes went away after a few days, but every morning I still check the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of habit. I look for the warning sign that almost disappeared before I paid attention. Now, when I look at my reflection, I don't just see the fatigue, I see the cost of ignoring it. I see the late nights, the skipped meals, the missed birthdays, the quiet moments traded for deadlines. I see someone who's built everything except rest. And the truth is, I don't blame anyone for it. Not the fans, not the media, not the companies. Just me. I created this rhythm. I built this life, and maybe it's time to rebuild it differently. But change is uncomfortable, especially when you've spent decades equating discomfort with progress. I remember a conversation I had with one of my engineers last year. He was 27, brilliant, ambitious, working 16-hour days. I told him to take a break, to rest for a weekend. He laughed and said, "Elon, I'll rest when we succeed." I didn't know what to tell him, because that's exactly what I used to say. And now I realize that's the most dangerous sentence in the world, because success never ends. It just evolves. And if you wait until you succeed to rest, you'll never rest at all. I've learned that the body doesn't care how many goals you've achieved. It only cares how much oxygen you're giving it. And lately, I haven't given mine much. Sometimes I imagine my body as a silent co-founder. It's been with me through everything, every launch, every failure, every sleepless night. It's the only partner that never quits. But I've treated it like an employee I could replace. Last night, I lay in bed and thought about that. About partnership, about respect, and I realized that the first partnership any human should protect is with their own body. Because when that partnership fails, everything else follows. When I was younger, I used to think that fearlessness was the goal. Now I think awareness is. Because fearlessness makes you reckless. Awareness makes you alive. I think about the people who look up to me, the dreamers, the builders, the kids watching this right now, thinking they need to sacrifice everything to matter. And I want to tell them this: you don't have to bleed to be worthy. Your body isn't an obstacle, it's your oldest ally. And every time you ignore its signals, you're burning the bridge that keeps you connected to the world you're trying to change. I'm saying this not as advice, but as a confession. Because last week, when my eyes were bleeding, I almost dismissed it. I almost said, "I'll check later." That later could have cost me more than a day's work. The irony is that I've spent years warning others about AI alignment, about making sure machines don't destroy humanity, and yet I've spent most of my life misaligned with my own humanity. That's the real alignment problem. If the smartest man alive can't listen to his own body, what hope do we have for machines learning empathy? The next morning, I went for a walk. No phone, no agenda, no noise. Just me, the air, and the sound of my own breathing. It felt unnatural at first. My mind kept reaching for distractions. But slowly, something shifted. I started noticing things I'd forgotten existed. Birds, sunlight, wind. The small, quiet proof that life goes on without notifications. I realized how long it had been since I'd experienced anything without a goal attached to it. Everything I do has a purpose, a target, an outcome. But this walk was meaningless in the best possible way. Sometimes meaning is overrated. Sometimes presence is enough. When I got back, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, but I didn't check emails. I opened a blank page. I wrote 3 words: I am tired. Then I deleted them, not because they weren't true, but because they weren't the full truth. I wasn't just tired, I was empty, stretched too thin, bleeding not from injury, but from imbalance. That's what exhaustion really is. It's not just fatigue, it's disconnection. It's when your mind outruns your body, and your soul can't keep up with either. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and thought about how strange it is that we build rockets to Mars but forget how to land within ourselves. Maybe progress isn't about reaching further anymore. Maybe it's about remembering how to return. That's what the blood in my eyes taught me. It wasn't punishment. It was a path back to humility, to awareness, to balance. It reminded me that before I was a CEO, a founder, a headline, I was just a kid fascinated by light and physics and the mystery of things that work. I used to wonder, not compete. I used to dream, not calculate. I want that back, not instead of ambition, but alongside it. Because the world doesn't need more machines. It needs more mindful humans. And maybe that starts with rest. That morning changed something in me. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly, like the way dawn replaces darkness. Not with noise, but with light. For years I thought growth meant acceleration. Now I think it means awareness. Because awareness slows you down enough to see what's actually happening. I started paying attention to my sleep, my breathing, my thoughts. I started noticing the moments between the moments, the pauses I used to skip. I realized that every silence I used to fear was actually a space for recovery. A few days after the incident, I went back to the factory. Not because I was ready to work again, but because I wanted to see it differently. The same place that once felt like a battlefield suddenly looked beautiful. Not perfect, not romantic, but alive. Humans and machines working side by side. Lights flickering like stars. Hums of engines sounding almost like heartbeats. And I thought, this is what creation should feel like. Not chaos, not exhaustion, but harmony. A rhythm where effort and rest coexist. One of my engineers came up to me and asked if I was okay. I told him about the bleeding. He looked shocked, then nervous. He said, "You should rest, Elon." And I smiled because that was the first time I'd heard anyone on my team say that to me without fear. Maybe people follow your example more than your words. I realized that my exhaustion wasn't just hurting me, it was teaching everyone around me that burnout was normal. That bleeding for your dream was part of the job description. But it's not. It never should be. If your dream costs your health, it's not a dream, it's a debt. I stood there in the factory and thought about all the people I've worked with over the years. The ones who left quietly when they couldn't keep up. The ones who stayed until their eyes burned red like mine. And I thought about how I used to admire that, how I used to reward it. But now, I see it differently. Dedication isn't about how much you can endure. It's about how deeply you can care without losing yourself. There's a kind of strength in stopping, in saying, not today, not like this. That's not quitting. It's honoring the life that's carrying you. Sometimes I wonder how different the world would be if we treated rest with the same respect we treat work. If we celebrated pauses the way we celebrate achievements. Because a pause is not the end of a sentence. It's what gives the sentence meaning. The first week after my eyes bled, I tried something new. Every day, for 1 hour, I turned off my phone. Completely. No calls, no notifications, no interruptions. At first, it was uncomfortable. My mind kept reaching for distraction, like a hand reaching for a missing limb. But slowly, that discomfort turned into calm. That 1 hour became sacred. My hour of silence. My hour of being no one. During that time, I didn't plan, I didn't solve, I didn't fix. I just existed. I watched sunlight move across the floor. I listened to the wind hitting the glass. I heard the world breathing. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized something. The future isn't built in factories or meetings or algorithms. It's built in moments like that, in awareness, in stillness, in listening. If you lose that, No amount of innovation can save you. One evening, I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. He used to work with me at PayPal. We talked for hours, not about business, not about technology, but about life. About how somewhere along the way, we both forgot that our dreams were supposed to make life better, not smaller. He said something that stuck with me. He said, "Maybe your eyes bled because you couldn't cry." I laughed at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I haven't cried in years, not because I don't feel things, but because I don't give myself the time to. Every time sadness comes, I bury it under another project, another idea, another plan. Maybe that's why my body had to cry for me. We think emotional suppression is strength. It's not. It's delayed collapse. That's what happened that night. Not a random hemorrhage, a release. My body finally expressing what my soul couldn't. After that realization, I started making small changes. Not big ones, not dramatic declarations, just small acts of respect. I started eating breakfast again. I started saying no to meetings that didn't matter. I started telling my kids stories before bed. Real stories, not metaphors about Mars. And for once, I didn't rush through them. Because what's the point of building the future if you can't be present for the moments that make you human? The bleeding stopped, but the message stayed. And the message was simple. The future doesn't need you to be invincible. It needs you to be alive. We live in a world obsessed with speed. Everyone's racing towards something: success, validation, immortality. But nobody wins a race against themselves. You can build the fastest car, the tallest rocket, the smartest AI, but none of it matters if you forget how to breathe. Sometimes I think about Mars, about how far away it is, about how much effort it takes to get there. And then I think about how hard it is for people to simply rest here on Earth. Maybe conquering distance isn't our biggest challenge. Maybe it's learning how to stop running. People often ask me what motivates me. The truth is, it's not ambition anymore. It's gratitude. Gratitude that I still get to open my eyes red, tired, imperfect, and see another sunrise. Gratitude that I can still change, still learn, still slow down. Because slowing down doesn't mean giving up. It means giving attention. And attention is the purest form of love. If you're watching this and you've been pushing yourself beyond your limits, I want you to hear me clearly. Exhaustion is not a virtue. Rest is not a crime. You don't need to bleed to be worthy. You have the right to stop, to breathe, to heal. And if anyone tells you that slowing down means you're falling behind, remember this. Falling behind what? Behind a system that doesn't care about your health? Behind a clock that was never yours to begin with? There's no prize for being the most exhausted person in the room. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is say, "I'm tired," and let that be enough. Because one day, your body will remind you. It always does. And you can either listen when it whispers or wait until it bleeds. Last night, I looked in the mirror again. The red was gone. My eyes were clear, but they looked different, older, yes, but also softer. There was something new in them, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of having solved everything, but the peace of no longer fighting myself. I used to think the goal was to change the world. Now I think it's to remember the world as it is and protect the parts of it that keep us human. Maybe I'll always be restless. Maybe that's just who I am. But I've learned that even restlessness needs rest. The world will keep spinning without me for a few hours. The emails can wait. The deadlines will survive. But this body, this mind, this heart, they need me now. And I owe them that much. If you've ever ignored your body's warning, if you've ever felt guilty for slowing down, if you've ever needed permission to stop, consider this it. You have nothing to prove. You are enough, even when you rest. My eyes aren't bleeding anymore, but I still remember the moment they did, because it wasn't a failure, it was a message. A reminder that being human is not a weakness. It's the point. Share this if you've ever pushed yourself too far. Comment, "I understand," if you've ever felt your body beg for peace. And subscribe if you want more honest conversations, because sometimes we all need a reminder that the future isn't just something we build. It's something we have to survive to see.